I know there have been some questions on types of triangles in terms of classifying them. And there are two ways to classify triangles, based on their size and based on their angles. Okay, so if you see a triangle and it has the box on the corner, this is a right triangle. So I'll use a little abbreviation for triangle instead of writing it out. So there's one right angle. You may not know anything about the other two angles except that it does need to add up to 180. But for sure there's an angle with one of the box indicating the right angle. That's one type. Another type is an acute triangle. All three angles need to have an acute measure. Now it's not anything specific, but as long as the angles have something like a 40, 60, and 80. Well, 40, 60 plus 80 does add up to 180, so that makes a triangle. All three of these angles are acute, so by definition this is an acute triangle because of the angle measures. There's one more type of triangle based on its angles. It's called an obtuse. You have one obtuse angle. One obtuse angle, so an angle in the triangle that is larger than 90 degrees. So if you have a triangle drawn, and let's say this big one they said is 100 degrees. I don't know the other two. I don't need to. All I know is that this angle right here is 100 degrees. That means the triangle is an obtuse triangle. So classifying triangles based on sides. You can have a right triangle, an acute triangle, or an obtuse triangle. Now, based on its sides, there's some different definitions. A scalene means all three sides have different measures. All three sides have different measures. You can have an isosceles. The two sides of the triangle are congruent, so have the same length. And then you have an equilateral. All three sides have the same length. Okay. So if you see a triangle and it marks the sides on there of 2, 3, and 4. Well, these all have different measures, different lengths indicated by the numbers, so it means this triangle is scalene. Isosceles just means to have an indication that two of the sides are equal. I don't have to know the number value, but if I mark those congruent, then it tells me it is isosceles because the two sides are marked congruent. Consequently, one thing about isosceles triangles is if you have two congruent angles, you also have if you have two congruent sides, you will also have two congruent, what they call as base angles. Equilateral will look somewhat like isosceles, but you will have all three sides marked with the same marking, or, they'll have a 7, 7, and 7, but they all have the same length. Now, similarly, isosceles, if in isosceles you have two congruent sides and two congruent angles, in equilateral, If you have three congruent sides, it means you have three congruent angles. So all the angle measures do come up to be 180 divided by 3, or 60 degrees. Now, one thing that does get confusing is that if you have a triangle and you're asked to classify it, something like this. Well, this is a right triangle based on the angle, and it is also based on the sides isosceles. If you have a triangle drawn like this, it's marked as 60, 60, and 60. This is called equiangular because all the angles are equal. But like I just said for equilaterals, if all three angles are congruent, all three sides have to be congruent. So this is definitely an equilateral. It is also equiangular. Consequently, they all are acute. There's an equilateral acute triangle, there's an equilateral equiangular acute triangle. So they can mean more than just one thing or the other. Based on the sides, you can sometimes classify a triangle. If you have something like this where you have a 30 degree, a 70 degree, and an 80 degree, well, I don't know anything marked about the sides, but I'll show you something in a second. This is definitely a scalene, it's a acute triangle based on the measures of the angles. If the angles have different measures, then it also means the sides will have different measures. So this is also a scalene triangle. So watch out, make sure you know, if you know information about the angles, you say whether it's right, acute, or obtuse. And based on that, sometimes you can get a little bit more information about the sides, if they're 2 congruent, 3 congruent, or none of them congruent. So when you classify, make sure you do it carefully based on the angles and also carefully based on the sides.